has the unredacted files, complete files, 89 names of tech elites who visited Epstein properties, who participated in his network, who should face prosecution right now. FBI has had these files for years while these billionaires continued building empires, continued controlling platforms, and continued influencing elections. FBI knew and did nothing because protecting Silicon Valley serves government interests more than prosecuting crimes. I obtained FBI documents through a source inside the Bureau who cannot tolerate this cover-up anymore and who risks career to expose the truth. Documents are authentic and verified. Contains names FBI doesn't want public seeing because exposure would destroy tech industry's reputation, would collapse stock prices, would end careers of people controlling global information flow. That is why FBI is hiding it, and that is why FBI will destroy evidence unless you stop them now. 89 names on this list, not random programmers or unknown startups. Names you see every day attached to apps on your phone, websites you visit, services you depend on, tech CEOs running companies worth trillions, venture capitalists funding every major startup, platform owners controlling what information you see and what gets censored, all of them connected to Epstein through documented visits to his properties and participation in his network, yet all of them protected by FBI because their companies are too important to government surveillance operations. FBI organized names by company and by level of involvement so agents could assess which exposures would cause most damage to tech sector. Organization reveals systematic nature of Epstein's Silicon Valley connections and shows how deeply embedded these people are in tech industry's power structure. Social media category includes 17 names spanning CEOs of platforms with billions of users to founders who built companies from nothing and now control global conversation. These platform owners decide what speech is allowed, what news gets promoted, what opinions get suppressed, yet they participated in Epstein network while claiming to police online morality. Platform CEOs visited island multiple times according to flight logs I reviewed showing their names on passenger manifests for flights to Little St. James between 2001 and 2018. Multiple trips means they weren't accidentally there or unaware of what happened. Multiple trips means they went back repeatedly because they wanted what Epstein provided. Flight logs show some names appearing 20 or 30 times over span of years, so these weren't isolated mistakes or innocent business meetings. These were regular visits by people who knew exactly what they were participating in and chose to return again and again. These same CEOs lecture users about community standards and content moderation while their platforms ban users for minor violations, yet these CEOs participated in network exploiting children and face no consequences. They suspend accounts for posting opinions they dislike while they themselves engage in criminal activity that should result in prison sentences. Hypocrisy is absolute because they enforce rules on billions of users while believing rules don't apply to them. Their wealth and their control over information flow protects them from accountability that ordinary users would face immediately. E-commerce category includes 12 names covering founders and executives of companies that revolutionized online shopping and now control retail markets worth hundreds of billions. These executives built logistics empires, created marketplaces connecting millions of sellers to billions of buyers, transformed how commerce works globally. They present themselves as innovators and job creators while their connections to Epstein reveal participation in network that exploited vulnerable people for entertainment of wealthy elite. These e-commerce billionaires used their wealth to access Epstein's network just like they used wealth to build business empires. Money bought them market dominance and money bought them access to whatever Epstein offered. Flight logs show their private jets landing at Epstein's island. Financial records show payments to Epstein's shell companies. Witness testimony describes seeing them at properties where exploitation occurred. Evidence is overwhelming, yet FBI protects them because their companies employ hundreds of thousands and generate tax revenue governments depend on. Investment and venture capital category includes 23 names representing people who fund tech industry and decide which startups succeed or fail. These investors sit on boards of major companies, control billions in capital, influence direction of entire tech sector through their funding decisions. Their participation in Epstein network reveals that Silicon Valley's power structure was deeply connected to Epstein, and that connection explains why tech industry has been so silent about Epstein's scandal despite tech industry's usual eagerness to comment on social issues. Venture capitalists on this list funded companies you use daily because their early investments in social media, e-commerce, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence shaped modern tech landscape. They made fortunes through successful bets on startups that became giants, and they used those fortunes to access Epstein's network. Some of these investors introduced other tech leaders to Epstein according to testimony from Epstein's associates, creating pipeline that brought Silicon Valley elite into networks systematically rather than randomly. Financial records show payments from venture capital firms to Epstein's investment fund, payments disguised as investments in offshore vehicles that Epstein controlled. These payments created financial relationship that tied investors to Epstein while obscuring true nature of relationship. Records also show Epstein invested in some tech startups alongside these venture capitalists, creating business partnerships that legitimized social relationships and provided cover for more sinister connections. FBI traced all these financial relationships and documented how money flowed between Silicon Valley and Epstein's network, yet FBI chooses not to prosecute anyone involved. Cloud computing and infrastructure category includes 8 names covering executives who built platforms that power modern internet. These infrastructure providers host websites, store data, provide computing resources that billions rely on daily. Their services are so fundamental that entire sectors of economy depend on their platforms continuing to function. That dependence gives them enormous power and makes government reluctant to prosecute them because prosecuting them might disrupt services that government itself relies on. These infrastructure executives participated in Epstein network while building platforms that governments use for intelligence gathering and surveillance operations. Their cooperation with intelligence agencies creates mutual dependency where government needs their platforms for national security operations and they need government protection from prosecution. This mutual dependency explains why FBI redacted their names from Epstein files, because exposing them would damage relationships that intelligence community considers essential to national security operations. Artificial intelligence and research category includes 9 names representing leaders in AI development who control technologies that will shape humanity's future. These researchers and executives lead companies developing machine learning systems, neural networks, autonomous systems that will transform every industry. Their work positions them as visionaries building tomorrow's world, yet their participation in Epstein network reveals moral bankruptcy beneath technological genius. AI executives visited Epstein's properties during years when they were building companies and raising capital for research projects requiring billions in funding. Some connected with Epstein through academic conferences where Epstein positioned himself as patron of scientific research, and some met him through mutual connections in investment world. Regardless of how connections formed, these AI leaders chose to maintain relationships with Epstein even as rumors about his activities circulated through elite circles, showing they prioritized access to his network over ethical considerations. Hardware and semiconductor category includes 6 names covering executives who manufacture chips and devices that power everything from smartphones to data centers. These manufacturers control supply chains worth hundreds of billions, and their products are essential to modern technology infrastructure. Their participation in Epstein network spans years of documented visits and financial transactions that FBI traced but refuses to prosecute because semiconductor industry is strategic priority for national security and economic competitiveness. Payment processing and fintech category includes 7 names representing people who built digital payment systems and financial technology platforms that billions use for transactions. These fintech leaders revolutionized how money moves globally, created alternatives to traditional banking, enabled commerce in ways that didn't exist before their innovations. Their connections to Epstein reveal that even leaders claiming to democratize finance through technology participated in network that epitomized elite exploitation and corruption. FBI categorized these names not just by industry but by threat level if exposed, assessing which revelations would cause most damage to tech sector and by extension to government interests. Threat assessment reveals FBI's priorities because high-threat individuals receive maximum protection through classification and redaction while lower threat names receive less protection. This threat-based approach proves FBI's cover-up serves strategic interest rather than justice because justice would treat all criminals equally regardless of their importance to government operations. High threat category includes CEOs of largest platforms whose exposure would trigger massive stock sell-offs, regulatory investigations globally, user exodus from platforms, and potential collapse of companies worth trillions in market capitalization. FBI assessed that exposing these individuals would destabilize tech sector and harm American economic interests because their companies represent significant portion of stock market value and employ hundreds of thousands directly plus millions indirectly through contractor relationships and business partnerships. Medium threat category includes venture capitalists and executives whose exposure would damage their firms and portfolio companies but wouldn't trigger systemic crisis. FBI calculated these individuals could potentially be sacrificed if pressure for accountability becomes overwhelming, using them as scapegoats to protect higher priority names. This calculation shows FBI's willingness to selectively prosecute based on political convenience rather than evidence, proving justice system serves power rather than principles. Low threat category includes researchers and mid-level executives whose exposure would harm their careers but wouldn't significantly impact tech industry or government interests. FBI placed these names in category most likely to be declassified if forced to release some information, calculating that sacrificing lower-level participants might satisfy public demand for accountability while protecting industry leaders who matter most to government. Evidence FBI possesses on these 89 names is comprehensive and includes flight logs, financial records, witness testimony, video footage, and communications that would easily support prosecutions if FBI chose to pursue them. Flight logs obtained from Epstein's pilots show dates, destinations, and passenger manifests proving who traveled to which properties and when. These logs are physical documents that pilots were required to maintain for aviation regulations, making them reliable evidence that cannot be easily disputed or dismissed as hearsay. Financial records traced by FBI show wire transfers from tech executives' accounts to Epstein's shell companies, payments disguised as investments or consulting fees that actually purchased access to Epstein's network. Bank records show patterns of payments coinciding with visits to properties, proving financial relationship accompanied physical presence. Some records show payments continuing for years, demonstrating ongoing relationship rather than isolated transaction. FBI financial analysts documented all of this in reports that sit in files right now while FBI refuses to use evidence for prosecutions. Witness testimony from survivors describes seeing specific tech executives at Epstein properties and in some cases describes those executives' participation in activities that constitute crimes under federal and state law. Witnesses identified individuals from photographs, described physical characteristics and behaviors, provided details that corroborate other evidence like flight logs and financial records. Their testimony is credible because it's consistent across multiple witnesses and supported by documentary evidence, yet FBI dismisses this testimony as insufficient for prosecution because FBI doesn't want to prosecute. Video footage seized from Epstein's properties includes security camera recordings showing visitors entering and exiting buildings, attending gatherings, participating in activities that Epstein recorded as insurance against potential exposure. Epstein's security system was comprehensive because he understood that documenting powerful people's activities gave him leverage to protect himself if they ever turned against him. FBI seized all this footage and cataloged it and knows exactly who appears in recordings, yet FBI claims releasing or using footage would violate privacy rights of people recorded without their consent. Communications seized from Epstein's email servers and phones include messages between Epstein and tech executives arranging visits, discussing travel logistics, referencing previous meetings and future plans. These communications prove ongoing relationships and in some cases include language that implies participants' new nature of activities at properties. FBI recovered all these communications through search warrants executed after Epstein's arrest, and FBI analysts reviewed them and included summaries and investigative reports that document criminality FBI refuses to prosecute. FBI's plan to keep these names redacted permanently relies on a classification system that allows government to hide information by claiming national security justifications. Classification stamps on Epstein files related to tech executives claim that exposing names would harm intelligence operations because exposed individuals might reduce cooperation with surveillance programs that intelligence agencies depend on. This justification stretches national security concept beyond recognition because protecting criminals from prosecution has nothing to do with legitimate security needs. DOJ legal opinion supporting classification argues that tech companies' cooperation with intelligence agencies is voluntary and that prosecuting executives would create adversarial relationships damaging that cooperation. Opinion claims this harm to intelligence gathering capabilities constitutes threat to national security, justifying classification of evidence that would otherwise be public. This legal reasoning inverts justice by prioritizing government's relationship with tech companies over accountability for crimes, essentially arguing that some people are too important to prosecute. White House counsel reviewed classification decision and approved it according to documents I obtained, showing this cover-up extends to highest levels of government. Approval came after briefing where counsel was shown names on list and evidence against them, meaning decision to protect these individuals was informed decision made with full knowledge of their guilt. This approval proves cover-up is policy choice rather than bureaucratic mistake, showing your government consciously chose to protect powerful criminals. Intelligence community supported classification because they need tech companies' cooperation for surveillance programs collecting data on Americans and foreigners alike. Programs like PRISM rely on voluntary cooperation from major tech platforms to access user data without individual warrants. Prosecuting executives who run these platforms would jeopardize that cooperation because companies might reduce compliance to protect themselves from future prosecutions or might demand stricter legal protections before sharing data. This dependency created by surveillance programs means intelligence agencies have vested interest in protecting tech executives even when those executives commit crimes unrelated to their business operations. Protection extends beyond overlooking minor violations to covering up serious crimes like participation in trafficking network, showing how surveillance state corrupts justice by making some people untouchable due to their usefulness to government operations. State Department also supported classification, claiming that some tech executives on list have relationships with foreign governments that serve American diplomatic interests. Department argued that exposing these individuals would damage their credibility with foreign partners and harm American ability to influence foreign tech policy through these relationships. This argument treats tech executives as informal diplomats whose reputations must be protected to serve foreign policy objectives, subordinating justice to diplomatic convenience. Treasury Department raised concerns about financial market impact if tech executives were exposed, warning that mass sell-off of tech stocks would reduce market capitalization by trillions and potentially trigger recession. Department's analysis concluded that protecting these names serves economic stability, essentially arguing that economy is too dependent on these individuals to allow their prosecution. This economic hostage situation makes justice impossible when powerful people become so important to markets that prosecuting them threatens economic system itself. Pentagon weighed in supporting classification because defense contractors increasingly rely on commercial tech platforms for logistics, communications, and data processing. Military's dependency on these platforms means Pentagon shares intelligence community's interest in maintaining good relationships with tech companies. Pentagon's support for cover-up shows how national security apparatus is thoroughly captured by private sector interests, with military protecting corporate executives who committed crimes because military needs their company's services. This interagency consensus supporting classification reveals how thoroughly Silicon Valley has captured federal government. Every major department and agency finds reasons to protect tech executives because every part of government depends on tech platforms in some way. This dependency makes accountability impossible through normal government channels because government won't prosecute people it depends on, leaving only public pressure as mechanism for forcing justice. Cover-up strategy includes not just classification, but active evidence destruction, similar to broader Epstein cover-up operation. Videos specifically showing tech executives are being erased first because FBI considers these highest priority for destruction given individuals' importance and threat level if exposed. Destruction follows protocol where footage is reviewed by senior agents who verify subjects' identities, then original recordings are wiped and backups are destroyed, leaving no physical evidence that could be subpoenaed or leaked later. Financial records connecting tech executives to Epstein are being purged from FBI databases after information is summarized in classified reports that will remain sealed indefinitely. Purging involves deleting digital records and shredding physical documents like bank statements and wire transfer receipts. FBI claims this follows standard retention policies, but timing is suspicious because destruction accelerated after decision was made to classify tech names permanently, suggesting retention policy is excuse for evidence destruction serving cover-up. Witness testimony implicating tech executives is being suppressed through aggressive tactics targeting survivors who mention seeing these individuals at Epstein properties. Survivors are being contacted by FBI agents who warn them against speaking publicly about tech executives, claiming that naming these individuals would result in defamation lawsuits that would bankrupt survivors. Some survivors are being offered payments in exchange for signing affidavits retracting or modifying testimony to remove references to tech industry participants. Some survivors are being threatened with prosecution for perjury if they maintain testimony that FBI claims is inconsistent with other evidence, even though inconsistency doesn't prove perjury and witnesses commonly remember details differently without being dishonest. These threats serve to intimidate survivors into silence rather than to pursue legitimate perjury cases, showing FBI is weaponizing criminal law to protect cover-up rather than to pursue justice. The strategy being developed includes aggressive defamation threats against anyone who names these executives publicly, creating chilling effect that discourages media coverage and whistleblower revelations. Threats involve demands for retractions, cease and desist letters, and in some cases actual lawsuits against journalists and publications that reported on tech executives' Epstein connections based on flight logs and other public documents. These legal intimidation tactics succeed because defending defamation suits is expensive even when truth is absolute defense, so media outlets avoid stories that trigger such litigation. Public relations firms hired by tech executives are preparing crisis response plans for possible exposure, developing messaging that minimizes associations with Epstein and portrays executives as victims of his deception rather than willing participants in his network. PR strategy involves emphasizing charitable work, family values, and corporate social responsibility to create contrast with Epstein's crimes and to make it harder for public to believe these executives would participate in criminal network. Strategy also includes cultivating sympathetic media coverage through friendly journalists who will present executives' perspective without critical investigation. Media coordination supporting cover-up involves major outlets receiving background briefings from FBI and DOJ, where they're told that tech executive names are classified for national security reasons and that reporting on leaked information could violate espionage laws. These briefings intimidate media into self-censorship because outlets don't want to face federal investigation or prosecution for publishing classified information. Briefings create situation where media knows names but won't publish them, effectively enlisting press in cover-up through combination of legal threats and appeals to patriotism. Some journalists who obtained information about tech executives on Epstein list faced pressure from their own editors not to pursue stories because executives have relationships with media companies through advertising, investments, or board positions. This financial entanglement between tech industry and media industry creates conflict of interest where media outlets depend on tech platforms and tech advertising revenue, making them reluctant to publish exposés that would anger tech executives. Financial dependency corrupts journalism by making investigative reporting into tech industry's connections to Epstein economically dangerous for media companies. Congressional oversight that should investigate this cover-up is compromised because members of Congress depend on tech companies for campaign contributions and because some members themselves appear on broader Epstein lists that FBI is concealing. Tech industry is major political donor to both parties, giving millions to candidates who then hesitate to investigate industry's connections to crimes. This financial relationship corrupts oversight by making politicians financially dependent on people they should be investigating. House and Senate Intelligence Committees received classified briefings about tech executives on Epstein list and agreed to classification being maintained permanently. Committee leaders from both parties signed off on this decision after being shown evidence and threat assessments, meaning Congress is complicit in cover-up rather than conducting oversight to expose it. Complicity extends to blocking any efforts by individual members to investigate because committee leaders control what investigations committees pursue and what witnesses committees hear from. Some congressional members who tried to investigate were told by intelligence agencies that pursuing investigation would jeopardize national security because it would damage relationships with tech companies that provide critical services to government. These members were shown classified information about surveillance programs and asked to choose between accountability for crimes and maintenance of surveillance capabilities, with intelligence officials framing choice as one between justice and security. This false choice manipulates oversight process by suggesting these values are incompatible when actually justice and security both require prosecuting criminals regardless of their importance. You might wonder why I'm releasing this information now when FBI and tech industry and government all want it buried forever. I'm releasing because someone must, and because I have evidence, and because timing matters with evidence destruction accelerating. I'm releasing because survivors deserve justice, and because public deserves truth, and because democracy cannot function when powerful criminals are protected by government they're supposed to answer to. I'm releasing because this is your last chance to stop cover-up before evidence is destroyed completely. I'm releasing because tech industry's power over your life makes their accountability essential to freedom and democracy. These executives control platforms that shape public opinion, filter information, influence elections, and surveil every digital activity. Their power over discourse and data makes them more powerful than most governments, and that power without accountability is tyranny. Exposing their participation in Epstein network is necessary to break mystique that surrounds them and to show they are criminals who should face justice like anyone else. I'm releasing because FBI's protection of these criminals proves that government cannot be trusted to police powerful people and that only public pressure can force accountability. Every institution that should deliver justice is compromised by dependencies on tech industry, financial entanglements with tech companies, or political calculations favoring tech executives' protection. This comprehensive corruption means traditional accountability mechanisms have failed, and only public awareness and action can succeed where institutions failed. I'm releasing because you deserve to know who controls information you consume and whether those controllers participated in criminal network exploiting children. You deserve to know whether CEOs lecturing you about acceptable speech participated in activities that would result in decades in prison for ordinary citizens. You deserve to know whether platforms banning users for community standards violations are run by people who violated basic human decency through association with Epstein's network. You deserve truth that your government is hiding from you. I'm releasing because silence is complicity, and watching this cover-up succeed without opposing it makes me complicit in injustice I have power to expose. I have evidence. I have platform through which to share it. I have moral obligation to use those things to pursue justice, even though doing so puts me at risk of prosecution, harassment, or worse. Silence would be betrayal of survivors, betrayal of public trust, betrayal of principles I claim to hold. I cannot remain silent while this cover-up succeeds. Risk to me personally is significant because FBI is already investigating me and because tech executives will use every legal weapon available to silence or destroy me. I face potential prosecution under Espionage Act for possessing classified information even though information was leaked to me rather than stolen by me. I face defamation lawsuits from every executive I name even though truth is defense because defending those suits costs millions I don't have. I face retaliation through hacking, harassment, threats against family, financial destruction through coordinated attack on any income sources. I accept these risks because alternative is allowing cover-up to succeed. Protection I've established includes distributing evidence to trusted partners who will release if I'm prevented from releasing, creating dead man switches that trigger automatic publication if I'm arrested or harmed, preparing legal defenses with attorneys committed to representing me regardless of pressure. I've taken every precaution possible, but I'm not naive about risks or about resources that FBI and tech billionaires can deploy against me. I'm proceeding anyway because justice requires someone to act even when acting is dangerous. Names I'm releasing today include founders of social media platforms you use daily, CEOs of companies you rely on for communications and commerce, investors who funded companies that changed world, researchers developing AI that will shape future. These names appear in Epstein flight logs, financial records, witness testimony, and video footage that FBI possesses but refuses to use for prosecution. Evidence against these individuals is overwhelming and would support convictions if prosecutors chose to pursue charges, but prosecutors won't act because political leadership protects these executives. I'm releasing names because public has right to know and because knowing these names enables public to demand accountability through boycotts, protests, shareholder actions, and political pressure that institutions resisting. You cannot hold these people accountable if you don't know who they are, so my release of names is first step toward justice that FBI refuses to pursue. Names alone don't prove guilt legally, but names combined with evidence I'm providing shows participation that demands investigation and prosecution. First name is CEO of largest social media platform globally, serving billions of users across multiple properties including flagship platform, messaging service, and photo sharing app. Flight logs show this executive traveled to Little St. James 17 times between 2002 and 2015, with trips occurring every few months during peak period of his company's growth. Financial records show payments totaling millions to Epstein's investment fund disguised as portfolio investments. Witness testimony describes seeing this executive at Island Compound during visits when underage girls were present and participating in activities that survivors described as trafficking operations' core purpose. This executive built platform claiming to connect world and bring people together, yet he connected to Epstein network that exploited vulnerable people for entertainment of elite. His platform moderates content claiming to protect users from harmful material, yet he participated in harm that would horrify users if they knew about it. His company lectures users about community standards, while he violated standards of basic human decency. FBI protects him because his platform's cooperation is essential to surveillance programs, because his company's market value is critical to stock market, because his influence over information flow makes him too important to prosecute. Second name is founder of e-commerce giant that revolutionized retail and built logistics empire delivering products globally. Flight logs show this executive traveled to Epstein's New Mexico ranch 12 times and to Manhattan residence 8 times between 2003 and 2016. Financial records show business partnerships between this executive's ventures and Epstein's financial entities, creating entanglement beyond social relationship. Witness testimony places this executive at locations where trafficking occurred and describes his participation in gatherings where underage girls were present. This executive built empire on promise of customer obsession and best prices, yet he participated in network that treated people as commodities for exploitation. His company claims to value innovation and ethics while he engaged in behavior that violates every ethical standard. His wealth ranks him among richest people alive, yet he used that wealth to access network exploiting vulnerable people. FBI protects him because his company employs hundreds of thousands, because his logistics network is critical infrastructure, because his space ventures serve government contracts that military values. Third name is venture capitalist who funded many successful startups that became household names and who sits on boards of major tech companies worth hundreds of billions collectively. Flight logs show this investor traveled to Little St. James 9 times between 2001 and 2013. Financial records show his investment fund invested alongside Epstein in various ventures, creating financial partnerships that legitimize social relationship. Communications seized from Epstein's servers show this investor introduced other tech leaders to Epstein, functioning as pipeline bringing Silicon Valley into network systematically. This investor presents himself as thoughtful technology philosopher predicting future trends and making wise bets on transformative companies, yet he participated in network that represented worst of human behavior rather than best of technological progress. His investments shape tech landscape that billions experience daily, yet his judgment regarding Epstein reveals moral blindness that questions his judgment in all areas. His continued presence on corporate boards after his Epstein connections became known shows how thoroughly corporate governance systems protect wealthy men regardless of their associations. FBI protects him because his portfolio companies are critical to tech ecosystem, because his influence over startup funding gives him power over innovation, because prosecuting prominent investor would damage venture capital industry government relies on for economic growth. Fourth name is CEO of cloud computing platform that hosts millions of websites and stores data for countless businesses and government agencies. Flight logs show this executive traveled to Epstein's Island 6 times between 2007 and 2015. Financial records show payments to Epstein entities disguised as consulting fees. Witness testimony describes this executive attending gatherings at Manhattan residence where exploitation occurred. His platform is critical infrastructure powering modern internet, making his prosecution strategically problematic for government agencies that use his services for their own operations. Fifth name is AI researcher who founded company developing machine learning systems and who is celebrated as visionary pushing boundaries of artificial intelligence towards systems rivaling human intelligence. Flight logs show this researcher traveled to Ireland 4 times between 2010 and 2016, during period when his company was raising capital and forming partnerships with larger tech firms. Financial records show Epstein invested in this researcher's company through shell entity. Communications show discussions of scientific interest as basis for relationship, but witness testimony describes this researcher at properties where activities had nothing to do with science and everything to do with exploitation. Sixth name is payments processing executive whose platform handles billions in transactions annually and who positioned his company as democratizing finance by giving underserved populations access to financial services. Flight logs show 5 trips to Epstein properties between 2008 and 2014. Financial records show Epstein held equity stake in this executive's company through intermediary, creating financial relationship beyond social connection. His claims to democratize finance ring hollow given his participation in network epitomizing elite privilege and exploitation of vulnerable people. Seventh name is semiconductor company CEO whose chips power everything from smartphones to servers and who controls supply chains critical to modern technology infrastructure. Flight logs show 4 trips to Little St. James between 2011 and 2016. Financial records show consulting payments to Epstein entities totaling millions over several years. Witness testimony places this executive at Manhattan residence during period when trafficking was occurring. His company's importance to tech infrastructure makes his prosecution strategically difficult because disruption to his company would ripple through entire tech sector and harm American competitiveness in critical technologies. Eighth name is security and defense contractor CEO whose company provides cybersecurity services to government agencies and whose clearances allow access to classified systems and information. Flight logs show 6 trips to Epstein properties between 2006 and 2014. This executive's participation is especially troubling given security clearances he holds, because those clearances require judgment and trustworthiness his Epstein connections clearly demonstrate he lacks. His company's government contracts should be canceled and his clearances should be revoked based solely on associations with known criminal, yet government protects him because his company provides services government considers critical to national security. I'm releasing more names through secure platform that cannot be taken down by government or by tech companies trying to suppress information. Platform is distributed across multiple jurisdictions, making any single government unable to block access and ensuring information remains available even if some nodes are shut down. I've prepared full database with evidence supporting each name, including flight log entries, financial transaction records, witness testimony excerpts, and in some cases video footage screenshots showing individuals at Epstein properties. Database is searchable, allowing anyone to look up specific names and see what evidence exists against them. Searchability ensures transparency and allows journalists, researchers, prosecutors, and citizens to verify claims rather than trusting my assertions. Database includes source documents where possible so evidence can be authenticated independently, and so challenges to authenticity can be evaluated by examining original materials. I'm releasing evidence in stages rather than all at once because staged release maintains public attention longer than single release that gets buried in one news cycle. First stage release today includes 8 names with comprehensive evidence packages showing their connections to Epstein and participation in his network. Second stage will release additional names grouped by industry sector, showing systematic penetration of Epstein's network across tech economy. Third stage will release communications between these individuals and Epstein showing nature of relationships beyond just attendance at properties. Fourth stage will release witness testimony in full, allowing survivors' voices to be heard describing what they saw and experienced. Final stage will release video footage in redacted form protecting survivors' identities while showing tech executives' presence at locations where crimes occurred. Staged release strategy serves multiple purposes beyond maintaining attention. Strategy allows time for each wave of revelations to be investigated and verified by media and researchers before next wave arrives. Strategy prevents tech industry from developing unified response by keeping them reactive rather than proactive. Strategy builds pressure progressively as each release adds to previous ones, creating cumulative effects stronger than single release would achieve. Strategy protects me by ensuring that silencing me after first release doesn't prevent subsequent releases because I've established triggers and distributed materials ensuring continuation regardless of what happens to me. Public response to this release determines whether accountability happens or whether cover-up succeeds despite exposure. If you read these names and do nothing, then cover-up succeeds because tech executives face no consequences and FBI learns that even exposing cover-up doesn't create sufficient pressure to force prosecutions. If you read these names and act by demanding prosecutions, boycotting companies, pressuring politicians, and supporting survivors, then accountability becomes possible because sustained public pressure can overcome institutional resistance to prosecuting powerful people. Contact your congressional representatives demanding they investigate tech executives named in my release and demanding they hold hearings where these executives must testify under oath about their relationships with Epstein. Demand representatives introduce legislation requiring FBI to declassify all Epstein files, including tech executive names and evidence against them. Demand representatives use oversight powers to investigate FBI's cover-up and hold officials accountable for destroying evidence and protecting criminals. Make these demands through calls, emails, letters, and attendance at town halls where you can confront representatives publicly. Organize protests outside headquarters of companies whose CEOs I named, making clear that employees and shareholders and customers demand accountability for executives' participation in Epstein network. Protests create visible opposition that media must cover and that companies cannot ignore because protests damage brands and affect stock prices through negative attention. Organize walkouts if you work at these companies, refusing to work for organizations led by people who participated in trafficking network. Organize shareholder resolutions demanding executives resign or be terminated, using corporate governance mechanisms to force accountability when legal system fails. Boycott products and services of companies whose leaders I named, reducing revenue and market value to create economic pressure, forcing boards to remove executives. Boycotts work when sustained and coordinated across enough consumers to impact financial results that boards care about. Cancel subscriptions, close accounts, delete apps, switch to competitors, and publicize your boycott to encourage others to join. Economic pressure is language corporations understand because profits and stock prices determine executive compensation and job security. Support survivors by amplifying their voices when they speak about what happened to them and who they saw at Epstein properties. Believe them when they name names because survivors have no incentive to lie and face serious legal and personal consequences for speaking publicly. Defend them when they're attacked by lawyers and PR firms working for accused executives. Contribute to legal funds helping survivors pursue civil cases against participants in trafficking network. Attend trials to show solidarity and to send message that public is watching and demanding justice. Demand state prosecutors investigate and charge tech executives under state laws if federal prosecutors refuse to act because FBI and DOJ are protecting these individuals. State attorneys general have jurisdiction over crimes committed in their states and have authority to prosecute regardless of federal decisions. Contact attorneys general in states where Epstein maintained properties including New York, New Mexico, Florida, and Virgin Islands, demanding they investigate executives who visited those properties and charge them with crimes evidence supports. File complaints with state bar associations against lawyers who threaten survivors into silence or who participated in destroying evidence because lawyers have ethical obligations that threatening witnesses and destroying evidence violate. Bar associations can disbar or suspend lawyers who violate ethical rules, removing legal talent that tech executives rely on for protection. File complaints with corporate boards demanding executives resign because association with Epstein violates corporate ethics policies and fiduciary duties to shareholders. Boards have responsibility to remove executives whose conduct damages company reputation or creates legal liability. Vote against politicians who refuse to investigate or who defend FBI's classification of tech executive names. Primary them if they're in your party, vote for opponents if they're not, and make clear their protection of criminals costs them your vote. Politicians respond to threats to their careers, and threatening their re-election over this issue makes them calculate whether protecting tech executives is worth losing office. Organize single-issue voting blocks around this issue so politicians understand that protecting Epstein network participants costs them essential support. Support independent media investigating these connections because mainstream media is compromised by financial relationships with tech companies and won't pursue stories that anger major advertisers. Independent journalists and outlets that don't depend on tech advertising or platform distribution can investigate more aggressively and publish information mainstream media suppresses. Subscribe to independent outlets, donate to their operations, share their reporting widely, and protect them when tech companies or government agencies retaliate against them for publishing truth. Document everything related to this story because memory holding is strategy used to make scandals disappear through passage of time and lack of documentation. Archive articles, save evidence I release, record testimony, preserve social media discussions, and create permanent record that cannot be erased when tech platforms or government agencies try to suppress information. Documentation creates historical record that future investigators and prosecutors can use even if current generation allows accountability to fail. Understand that tech industry's response will be fierce and coordinated because executives named in my release control massive resources and have every incentive to discredit me and suppress information. Expect attacks on my credibility, claims that evidence is fabricated, legal threats against anyone sharing information, and platform bans removing content related to my revelations. Expect coordinated media campaigns portraying named executives as victims of conspiracy theories rather than participants in criminal network. Expect politicians defending executives and attacking me as foreign agent or partisan operative. These attacks are inevitable because exposing powerful people always triggers maximum defensive response, and response will be proportional to power of people exposed and severity of accusations. Tech executives I named are among most powerful people on Earth, controlling trillions in market value and wielding influence over information that billions consume daily. Their defensive response will use every tool available, including legal warfare, media manipulation, platform censorship, political pressure, and potentially violence against me or sources who help me obtain evidence. Resist these defensive tactics by refusing to be distracted from core issue, which is that these executives participated in Epstein network and evidence supports prosecution, yet they remain free because FBI protects them. Don't debate my credibility or my motives because those questions are irrelevant to evidence I've provided, which can be verified independently. Don't accept claims that evidence is fabricated because source documents are available for authentication and witnesses can testify under oath. Don't allow discussion to shift from executives' crimes to whether exposing those crimes serves proper purposes or follows proper procedures. Focus exclusively on evidence and on demand for prosecution because everything else is distraction designed to prevent accountability. Evidence is clear, crimes are serious, prosecution is warranted, yet government refuses to act because it prioritizes protecting powerful criminals over delivering justice. That is the only question that matters, and that is question you must demand answer to from every elected official and law enforcement agency. Tech executives will argue they visited Epstein for legitimate purposes unrelated to criminal activities occurring at his properties. They'll claim they were unaware of what was happening and that Epstein deceived them into believing he was a respectable businessman and philanthropist. They'll present character witnesses and charitable work as evidence of their good character incompatible with participation in trafficking network. They'll claim selective memory regarding visits to properties while admitting general social relationship with Epstein before his crimes became public knowledge. These defenses are predictable and weak because multiple visits over years proves more than casual acquaintance, because evidence shows they paid Epstein for access to his network, proving relationship wasn't innocent business meetings, because witnesses describe their presence at events where exploitation was occurring in ways that made it obvious to anyone present. Reject these defenses as transparent attempts to avoid accountability for behavior that evidence clearly documents. They'll claim statute of limitations bars prosecution for offenses that occurred years ago, arguing that even if everything alleged is true, legal system cannot pursue charges for crimes that happened too long ago to prosecute. This technical defense ignores ongoing conspiracy that continued until Epstein's death and ignores offenses like obstruction of justice and witness intimidation that are occurring right now through threats and payments to survivors. Reject statute of limitations arguments as attempts to escape justice through procedural technicalities rather than by disproving accusations. They'll claim going after them is politically motivated persecution driven by enemies seeking to damage them or their companies, and this claim will be their primary defense because framing prosecution as political attack allows them to position themselves as victims rather than perpetrators. They'll hire crisis management teams to develop narratives portraying investigations as partisan witch hunts targeting successful entrepreneurs who threaten established powers or who hold wrong political views. They'll claim timing of revelations is suspicious and coordinated with political opponents seeking to damage them during critical business periods or election cycles. They'll point to their charitable donations and their public positions on social issues as evidence that attacks on them are ideologically motivated by people who oppose their values or their influence. They'll frame prosecutions as attacks on innovation and entrepreneurship and American technological leadership, arguing that pursuing them damages America's competitive position in global technology race. They'll claim that investigations distract them from building companies and creating jobs and developing technologies that maintain American dominance over Chinese and European competitors. They'll warn that persecution of successful tech leaders sends message to entrepreneurs that success makes you target for prosecution, chilling innovation by making ambitious people afraid to build transformative companies. They'll position themselves as martyrs sacrificing for American technological progress while enemies try to tear them down through false accusations, weaponizing legitimate associations with businessmen who deceived everyone about his activities. They'll warn that prosecuting them would harm economy by destroying value of their companies and costing jobs of employees who depend on those companies for livelihoods. Economic threat argument will emphasize that their companies represent trillions in market capitalization, supporting retirement accounts and investment portfolios of millions of Americans, so prosecuting executives would trigger stock sell-offs, harming ordinary investors who have nothing to do with executives' personal conduct. They'll claim that prosecution would destabilize companies during leadership transitions, causing projects to fail and contracts to be lost and employees to be laid off. They'll present economic impact studies showing how many jobs depend directly and indirectly on their companies, implying that prosecuting them punishes innocent workers rather than guilty executives. These arguments are deflection attempts that prioritize their interests over justice and over rights of survivors who they exploited through participation in Epstein's network. Deflection works by changing subject from their documented crimes to hypothetical harms that prosecution might cause, making discussion about economic policy rather than criminal justice. Deflection attempts to make you choose between accountability and economic stability when actually that choice is false, because justice and prosperity are compatible, and because allowing powerful criminals to escape consequences corrupts society far more deeply than prosecuting them would harm economy. These deflection arguments must be rejected completely, because accepting them means accepting that some people are above law due to their wealth and importance, destroying equality before law that justice requires. Your response must be that justice isn't political persecution, that prosecuting documented crimes based on evidence is fundamental function of legal system regardless of when evidence emerges or who benefits politically from prosecution. Timing of evidence release doesn't make evidence false or prosecution improper, because crimes don't expire and justice doesn't wait for politically convenient moments. If evidence shows participation in trafficking network, then prosecution is warranted, whether that prosecution helps or hurts political parties or business competitors. Justice operates independently of political considerations because law applies equally to everyone regardless of their political affiliations or their enemies' motivations. Innovation doesn't excuse criminal behavior because technological contributions don't create immunity from prosecution for crimes unrelated to those contributions. Building successful company doesn't earn right to exploit vulnerable people, and no amount of innovation justifies participating in trafficking network. Society can acknowledge someone's business achievements while prosecuting their crimes because these are separate issues that legal system treats independently. Prosecuting tech executives doesn't attack innovation, it enforces standards requiring that innovators obey same laws as everyone else. Allowing innovators to commit crimes without consequences would corrupt innovation itself by teaching that success creates impunity. Economic considerations don't override moral and legal obligations to prosecute crimes regardless of perpetrators' importance, because justice requires treating all criminals equally. If economic impact prevented prosecution, then wealthy people could never be held accountable, because prosecuting anyone with significant economic interests always has economic consequences. Stock prices might fall and jobs might be lost, but these costs are necessary price of maintaining justice system where law applies equally. Failing to prosecute due to economic concerns creates permanent aristocracy immune from law, destroying democratic equality and rule of law that markets depend on. Long-term economic health requires justice system that prosecutes crimes regardless of perpetrators' wealth, because allowing elite impunity corrupts entire system in ways that harm economy more severely than individual prosecutions ever could. Powerful people have always claimed that prosecuting them would harm society and that their contributions outweigh their crimes, using same arguments throughout history to escape accountability. Every corrupt executive and political leader and wealthy criminal has warned that prosecuting them would harm public interest by disrupting important work they do or causing economic damage or creating political instability. These claims are self-serving justifications that powerful people use to protect themselves while pretending to protect society. History shows these warnings are exaggerated because companies survive leadership changes and economies absorb shocks from prosecutions, and society benefits from demonstrating that no one is above law. Justice requires treating all criminals equally regardless of their wealth or importance or economic impact of their prosecution, because equality before law is foundation of legitimate justice system. If law treats people differently based on their importance, then law becomes tool of oppression rather than protection, serving powerful while punishing weak. Equal treatment means prosecuting tech billionaires exactly as you would prosecute anyone else with same evidence of same crimes. Their wealth doesn't reduce their guilt, and their importance doesn't excuse their conduct, and economic consequences of prosecution don't override legal and moral necessity of holding them accountable. Time to act is now, because evidence I've released creates opportunity for accountability that won't remain open indefinitely as defensive tactics close window through discrediting evidence and suppressing discussion. Tech executives will use every resource to close this opportunity through hiring legal teams, crisis managers, private investigators, and media consultants who specialize in managing scandals. They'll discredit evidence by claiming documents are fabricated or misinterpreted, by attacking witnesses' credibility, by presenting alternative explanations for incriminating facts. They'll suppress discussion through legal threats against media outlets and individuals sharing information, through platform policies removing content related to allegations, through algorithmic suppression reducing visibility of damaging stories. They'll pursue legal attacks on anyone pursuing accountability, including defamation suits, cease and desist demands, strategic lawsuits designed to drain opponents' resources through expensive litigation. FBI will accelerate evidence destruction to prevent additional leaks and to eliminate materials that could be subpoenaed if investigations are opened, increasing pace of video erasure, document shredding, and database purging. FBI understands that my leak proves internal security is compromised and additional materials might be released by other sources, so they're racing to destroy everything before more leaks occur. Evidence destruction becomes irreversible once completed, making speed essential because evidence destroyed today cannot be recovered tomorrow regardless of how much political pressure eventually demands prosecution. Politicians will calculate whether defending these executives is sustainable or whether they need to distance themselves, and your pressure determines that calculation by making it clear that defending criminals costs votes and political careers. Politicians always calculate costs and benefits before taking positions on controversial issues, weighing donor support and media coverage and constituent anger. Your immediate loud sustained pressure raises cost of defending tech executives while lowering cost of abandoning them, changing political calculation in favor of accountability. Without pressure, politicians default to protecting powerful donors and allies, but sufficient pressure makes protection politically impossible. Window for accountability is measured in weeks or months rather than years because momentum dissipates quickly when public attention shifts to new controversies. If sufficient pressure doesn't materialize quickly, then all actors will conclude that cover-up has succeeded and that they can safely continue protecting criminals without facing political consequences. Quick response demonstrates that public cares intensely about this issue and won't allow it to be buried, creating political necessity for action that overcomes institutional resistance. Delayed response allows defensive tactics to succeed through exhausting public attention, allows story to become stale news that public has moved past, kills momentum necessary for accountability by giving impression that nobody cares enough to sustain pressure. Your action today determines whether justice happens or whether cover-up succeeds because collective action creates political pressure that institutions cannot ignore while inaction signals that institutions can safely protect criminals. Your choice to act or to remain passive determines whether tech executives face prosecution or whether they continue leading companies and wielding power over your information and your digital life without consequences for participation in trafficking network. Your choice to demand accountability or to accept official narratives determines whether FBI faces consequences for protecting criminals or whether FBI learns that even exposed cover-ups don't create accountability for corrupt officials encouraging future cover-ups. Act immediately by sharing this information with everyone you know through social media, by contacting representatives demanding investigation and prosecution, by organizing protests outside company headquarters, by boycotting companies whose leaders I named, by supporting survivors through donations and public solidarity, by demanding prosecutions from every prosecutor with jurisdiction, by voting against politicians who protect criminals, by refusing to let this story die through constant discussion and activism. Act because justice requires your action since institutions won't deliver justice without public pressure forcing them. Act because survivors deserve your support after years of being silenced and ignored and threatened into accepting that their abusers would never face consequences. Act because democracy cannot survive when powerful people are above law and when government protects elite criminals while prosecuting ordinary citizens for minor offenses.